Hello and welcome to the 166th episode of Old Romans Unscripted. Tonight's episode is simply entitled Junius, which of course is Latin for June, which of course can be an controversial month. But we'll more of that in a moment. But in waiting in the green room are our wonderful panelists, and we shall bring them on now. Hello.
Hello.
Thanks.
Hello.
So, joining us now, we have Father Thomas and Bishop Kelly, both of whom, from the backgrounds, I think, are in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And I, of course, am in the UK in Brighton. Greetings to our viewers. So greetings to Lime N in Missouri, to Dear Peggy in Tennessee, to Dearest Anne in Ireland, to Stephen in Warwickshire here in the UK, and greetings to Paul in Seattle. So already a great mix of viewership from our global audience. Greetings to you all, and thank you for saying hi. And as usual, anytime, please feel free to comment in the comments, make your own observations or ask questions. And if we can, we will get your comment or observation on screen and discuss it as well. So let's begin with Bishop Kelly with a simple question. What does the month of June mean to you?
What does it mean to me? Well, it's the month of the Sacred Heart, of course, spiritually. It's also that wonderful transition from spring into summer. So there's some heat around, some light, some people enjoying a well-deserved break, especially here in the Midwest after hibernating most of the winter. People are out, beaches are open. It's a time for friends, for families, for travel. It's a Eucharistic month with Corpus Christi. So spiritually, we're held in the heart of Jesus, as we always are. But we are particularly reminded of it, of that Sacred Heart, and also to call to experience our Blessed Lord through the Holy Sacrament of the Eucharist. You know, I'm reminded of, and I'll probably butcher this because, okay, here's a cat just to make my life even more difficult. No.
Guaranteed to go.
So yeah, and the Oscar goes to Luca. Anyway, yeah. So you know, with the Sacred Heart, we have the quote that "Behold the heart which has loved the world so much and been loved so little in return," and also the prayer to the Blessed Sacrament, often recited by people as they pass a chapel or a church in which the sacrament is reserved. That hope and prayer before the sacrament, that you come to acknowledge, to worship Christ present in the tabernacle, where he is neglected in many tabernacles throughout the world. And often a prayer, or certainly a sentiment that I think of whenever if I walk into a church. Hard to find one open these days. when I walk in and genuflect and kneel, even for a moment, or at least while crossing myself, passing a church, I remember Christ in the tabernacle. Of course, not that he is lonely; he's in heaven, surrounded by the angels and saints, in the glory of the triumphant. But to acknowledge that is to acknowledge his presence, and the aspiration is that, of course, he acknowledges our presence and will before the throne of the Father, through his mercy on the day of judgment.
Yeah. I always, sometimes when I think of lonely tabernacles, it often makes me think of the Garden of Gethsemane.
Mm-hmm.
And our Lord's loneliness there. Father Thomas, what is due to you?
I mean, everything that the good bishop has already mentioned, of course. I really, over the years recently, June has often been a personal reflection of humility for me. I really think humility is something that we tend to overlook and not really cooperate with much, myself and my track record. But I think this month, typically I try to really give a good spiritual reflection on humility, praying the litany of humility and just asking our Lord to bless me more in humility, because often our pride can get the better of us. And you may hear that word being thrown around a lot this month. But what really comes down to is the pride just even of all of us. The pride in the trad world, TLM better than Navasoto and all that, the infighting that you see so many times. So the past few years for me, this month has become a month of humility. And I may not be able to execute it fully yet, but with the grace of God, hopefully at the end I will. But I keep trying.
Sorry for laughing there. It reminded me of, I thought I was in an episode of Yes, Prime Minister. When you started to speak, Father, you said, over the years, recently, I've Prime Minister. I cannot both be over the years and recently.
I'm glad you got that reference. I've kind of been watching it a little bit to distract me from the stressful week that I've been having. Uh-huh. It's giving me some great solace. So,
yes, indeed. Yes. Anything you want to share with us about your week?
I felt like I should have been Noah this past week. For our viewers, please keep me and all of us here in the friary in your prayers. We experienced some great water damage the past week, so over a week ago, and we're recovering from that. Still going through the assessment of damages as far as for effects. Hopefully this week ahead, we'll have structural work being done to repair the walls and the ceilings and the floors and whatnot of the water damage. But we had a great flood, if you will, in the friary. I guess the Holy Ghost comes on many forms. Water is one of them, I guess.
You know what's coming next, then?
If it's fire, then we're it's gonna be a great time.
let's pray it isn't. Yeah. Although, technically the flood was above you, wasn't it?
So actually, no. We are you. So for those of you,
the flood came from above. Yeah.
Well, and it caused a whole bunch of water damage. We got the bulk of the damage.
Yeah, water and gravity are great friends.
They are perfect friends, and make for a great sitcom here. I'm just very fortunate that the neighbors above us, who we've known for many years, we're all very charitable in this, and hopefully through the next weeks ahead, everything will be taken care of. But just a public service announcement. For those who may not have renter's insurance or homeowner's insurance, or you think you do, keep tabs on that to make sure it's still active.
Is that
Yeah,
is that
just
a comment with hindsight, or
kind of, yeah.
okay?
But anywho, all's hopefully going to be taken care of in the end. But yes, so that's been my week of past adventures here at the Friar in Chicago.
Okay. Bishop Kelly, how's your week been?
Dry.
Fair enough.
Yeah, no, just a usual dry week. It has been very dry here, actually, in the United States. You've probably been reading about Canada has given rise to a lot of wildfires. So we remember the people of Alberta and of Nova Scotia in our prayers as they battle with, which is I think it's certainly Nova Scotia, which is not a place given to wildfires. That it's the worst in recorded history. So we pray for the people and their homes and being at risk, and of course for their lives. And people of faith, that their faith will strengthen them through these trials. The old blessings of blessing a house against fire, plague, pestilence, flood, theft, etc., disaster, disease. Sounds a bit medieval, but as I keep saying, nothing much has changed, just the costumes. And Father, not even that.
Right.
Greetings to Shirley. They're in Saltdean here in the UK, not very far from where I am. And greetings to Father Christwell in Ohio. Greetings everyone again. So now you hit on it earlier, Father Thomas, because this month of June is often touted as being something else. And really I wanted for us in this episode to reflect on the juxtaposition of the devotion to the Sacred Heart that we as Catholics should be concentrating on this month, in contrast to that which is known as Pride, and all that celebrates. And of course, I think the most obvious distinction is the humility of God's love, the humility of the person of the Holy Trinity, becoming as one of us, in order that we might become one with Him. In contrast to that sense of pride, which is promoted this June, of me, myself, and I, the contemporary zeitgeist, where everything is about the self. And of course, this dichotomy and this issue is not just prevalent during the month of June. It's prevalent all the way through the year at the moment. But of course, this month there is a heightened exposition, we might say. And there is a saying, isn't there, that evil is allowed to triumph when good people say nothing, or do nothing. And there are many voices, many commentators on social media at the moment suggesting that the time is now for those voices who have been silent to now rise up and speak out against those elements of the political zeitgeist that are extremely damaging to the prospect, the potential, and future generations. Namely, of course, particularly trans, where the ideology is now being coercively, if not oppressively, imposed in our schools, both sides of the Atlantic. And this, of course, to the great harm and detriment of perhaps the most vulnerable of our young people. Those who have confused thoughts and feelings around their sense of self. And of course, the gospel and the purpose of the Sacred Heart is to enable us to understand ourselves as we truly are, as children of God. The gospel to enlighten us to the fact that we are the children of God, to embrace the personification of the Sacred Heart in Christ by responding to his invitation to live in love and in union with God, and through baptism to become acknowledged and recognized and made his children. But I think often, of course, we don't understand ourselves, or we don't seem to practice ourselves what it means to be a child of God. Either of you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, just occurring to me as you were speaking is that, well, first of all, pride is the first of the 7 deadly sins, but you know that call to fashion ourselves in the image and likeness of God, of which we are made, is a call to become like God, to have a relationship with the Father by living a Christ-like life. That He showed us the way. Indeed, He is the way, the truth, and the life. So, rather than find yourself in that identity, being true to your created reality of being in the image and likeness of God, this confusion forges a way or an ideology of conforming yourself to what you think you ought to be or to what you feel. And, you know, that is false. That is a constructed so-called reality that is rooted in the very thing to which religion, spirituality calls us to die to, which is the self, which is the ego, and to live in Christ and for God through the grace of the Holy Spirit. So, you know, again, as we have said, in regards to the liturgy, in regards to the church, in regards to Western culture and society, and the direction that it has moved recently and is hurtling into, you know, we're becoming man-centric rather than God-centric. And this call to you know, to move towards our created reality, to be more like the image and likeness of God, rather than the image that we construct, or which is, to use a term, a fluid, or maybe fluid, from one period of our lives to the next, is part of the great lie. It's not immersing yourself in the great truth, which is objective and not subjective. So it's incredibly important. The prayer to the Sacred Heart, make my heart like unto thine, not make my heart unto what, I'm feeling like today. I often point this out to some of my patients with counseling, is that, we can be two different people from one minute to the next. I mean, we can get up in the morning, like a bear with a sore head, and by lunchtime we're fine. We're nice to be around, but that wasn't the case 2, 3, 4 hours ago. So if we subject ourselves to these passing feelings, then we're constantly in flux, whereas God is steady, true, and eternal, and that's where we must take anchor. Either we build our house on sand, uh, which is fluid, and the foundations will come, and etc. And we're familiar with the analogy, or we build ourselves firmly on a rock, which is immutable. So that's the choice that we have. Pride month, Pride June month with rainbows and stuff. That is, sorry, I'm losing my my train of thought. Yeah, it'll come back to me. That it's yeah, sorry, I apologize. I was going somewhere, but yeah, I can say with Father Thomas's flood at the priory, if we remember, and he compared himself to Noah. But that's the first occasion of the rainbow and God's covenant in scriptures, and so let's reclaim that rainbow. It's not about pride; it's about a covenant with God. That's not where I was going. The genius thought that I just had will come.
I was just about to say it. So
sorry, I messed up twice.
I was going to intervene and try and rescue you, but you came up with it yourself. So that's
it's not what I was going to say, but whatever. Yeah, it'll make a good sermon someday.
Father Thomas.
Yeah. So where I lost train of focus and thought with the whole thing, because yeah, sorry.
Are we releasing chemicals in Chicago?
I don't know what's going on in the city right now. Well, I mean, I do, but yeah, I don't know. I know my sinuses have been acting up the past couple days, so I'm on sinus medication, decongestion right now. So that may be taking effect a little bit.
But I think one of the things that often turns me in the polarized debates that occur on social media around this topic, particularly concerning this month, and the ideologies that are thrown around. But one of the things that rather irks me, and it was something that there's a columnist here who writes for the Times of London called Matthew Paris, and he basically tried to suggest that most ordinary people are just happy to live and let live, and all this will blow over, and so on and so forth. To which I'm glad to say he received considerable complaint by response, as people rightly pointed out. Well, but this is no harmless thing. This is not like it was 10 years ago when some poor sod would walk around town badly dressed in a woman's frock, and everyone would go there. This is the situation now, where we have children who are being indoctrinated and coerced to take life-changing medication and surgery that is irreversible, that is lifelong, and all for the sake, as His Excellency said, for women fancy, for feelings that the prevalent scientific data suggests are indeed fleeting, are phases. The vast majority of children experiencing a spectrum of gender dysphoria will, by the end of adolescence, grow out of it and be properly aligned with their body and their gender. But the voices are growing stronger that are trying to push this craziness and this pseudoscience and push it in our schools. There's a high school, of course, that is at the moment. Parents are protesting a pride assembly and various, again, a vocal minority, but very vocal, is, calling these parents all sorts of names, accusing them of bigotry and hate and phobia and so on and so forth, whereas actually these are just parents being parents, which is looking out for the best interests of their children. And sad to say, we have people who are supposedly Catholics, and even Catholic priests, or even the occasional bishop, who is acquiescing to this this pressure, and even advocating it. Father Thomas.
So I'm going to try to deliver this thought clearly and charitably. And I know I got you two to help me if I make a mistake. I think there needs to be a clarification that there are two separate movements, or there's two separate ideas at play here. You have the agenda that we are seeing that is indoctrinating schools in the public setting, but you also have the idea of people who are experiencing same-sex attraction or experiencing sexual confusion. I think we need to separate those two parties, because there are far too many people who may be identifying or struggling with having a loving, committed relationship and sexual confusion and ideological that don't agree with what's taking place within the world as far as schools and what's happening in the secular world. So I really think if we're going to talk about this idea, we need to distinguish that there's two camps that we should really identify and sort out, so that way we're not roping everybody into one and trying to whitewash this whole thing, when really, I mean, this is as Bishop Kelly has said many times, this is probably the bowl of spaghetti of all bowl of spaghettis, in the sense, because you're dealing with so many ideals, so many, and it's difficult because the agenda and the movement that's being pushed in society, pretty soon it's going to lead to anarchy. There's going to be no laws, because how can you criminalize something? Pretty soon we're going to be advocating for murderers. Well, who are we to judge murderers? We
already do.
But but we're going to decriminalize murder. We're going to decriminalize. But you already kind of see that because in the beginning, as we kind of talked about, right? Just love and let live, right? If they're not bothering me, I won't bother them. And then you see the movement has progressed. We just want to have the same rights as everybody else. To now, they're in the schools telling a 4-year-old that's a boy that you're a girl, and you're supporting that. And that's like what, the past 10, 15 years. So the movement and agenda that we're talking about, and I guess pushing back on, is far different, I think, in the grand scheme of things, than those who are struggling or having confusion with their sexual identity. Because I think too many people get caught up in this movement that really don't know anything, and they're just trying to feel accepted, and are trying to be embraced by something greater than them, because that's what the human idea is. That's what we all desire, is love and acceptance. So I think there's this hijacking, if you will, or misconception taking place.
I think the problem there, and if I can try to help you by making it clear what it is you're trying to say. So, in other words, what you're saying is LGB is not necessarily is being conflated with T. So the movement for innate, perhaps biologically induced sexuality, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, and their fight for acceptance or social acceptance or rights or whatever, equality, is being hijacked and conflated with the trans activism that is seeking to impose indoctrination in our schools, etc. Is that the difference you're trying to make?
I mean, yeah.
And the only thing I'd say about that is the problem with that, I think, is that for the past 20 or 30 years, it has generally been LGBT as one thing, and that the drive for all the movements and the drives for equality and diversity in work environments, in HR policies, in etc. All this has always encapsulated all those four identities, LGBT. And the trouble is now, I think, is there's been this sudden rise in the T, which seems to be throwing things off balance for the group. And now there are indeed LGB alliances being formed, trying to now separate the LGB component of the movement for equality from what they perhaps rightly consider to be the craziness and of trans activism. I think the problem here, though, is not only the fact that historically these things have been conflated, but also too that as everyone talks about spectrums today, and there are, of course, even so you've got on Twitter, for example, you've got Gays Against Groomers, which is an LGB alliance against the trans activism. But then you've got characters like Scott Nugent, who is trans, but is anti-indoctrination of trans in schools, and every other kind of in between. So Professor Catherine Stock, for example, who here in the UK has been a subject of much controversy for the past couple of weeks, who was invited to speak at the Oxford Union, and various LGBT and trans activists were trying to block and have her disinvited. But Kathleen, for example, Catherine, sorry, on the one hand, she is anti-trans in the sense of that actually, to be fair to her, actually she's not anti-trans. She is against the indoctrination or trans indoctrination in schools and society, and the attack particularly on women's safe spaces. But she herself is lesbian, and otherwise is pro same-sex marriage, is pro same-sex adoption, so on and so forth. And I think, what can be confusing is if we try to extrapolate and differentiate, because all of these stances are anti-Catholic in the terms of the faith, in terms of the witness of the faith and the living of the faith. Now, as we've said many times before, you are not condemned if you are LGBT or even T for simply being or having feelings. But where the line is drawn by scripture, by divine revelation, by the perennial teaching of the magisterium of the church, is when anything is enacted of those identifying feelings and thoughts. That's where the line is drawn. So you are not a sinner just because you're gay, but if you could commit acts of gay behavior, then you transgress, and then you are a sinner.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's that's cliche, but that differentiation between the sin and the sinner, or rather the person who has the potential to sin and one who actually sins.
Yeah, it's like it's like marriage. Just because you're married does not just give you the license to have sex. It gives license to have sex with your wife or your husband, but not beyond that. That that you're called to live according to the state that you find yourself in. That you kind of made my point for me, but I spoke to a guy at work recently, actually, because Pride Month was coming up, and he made some sort of joke to me about, he goes, oh, I suppose you'll be retreating into your churches because it's Pride Month. And I said, no, we should be coming out of our churches. So we were chit-chatting. He was only joking, but we were chit-chatting, and he and his partner have a kid and goes to school, and both of them are very concerned about the direction that this is being pushed in schools. And recently, well, not that recently, a few months ago, I was in an antique shop, and the owner had his dog running around, and the dog was friendly, and I was trying to work out whether the dog was he or she. And anyway, I got it wrong, and I quipped, I suppose I should have asked for its preferred pronouns first. And he rolled his eyes, and he goes, I really shouldn't speak against my community, but this stuff drives me mad. And I said, well, precisely, you should speak against your own community and highlight this. Somebody has to say the emperor has no clothes, or pronouns. Anyway, it's and what really worries, the whole live and let live thing that you brought up. Like, I remember there was what was it called? Anyway, it doesn't matter what it was called, but there was it wasn't a bar, it wasn't a club, or it was just a private room that this group rented out during the late 80s in Belfast for, we used to call them transvestites back then, that's what they called themselves, where they would meet, and they would come in, with kind of like a gym bag and change into their clothes, and they would hang out and talk and whatever. And of course, then the Ian Paisley and the Free Presbyterians were protesting outside when they got wind of this. And they looked like men in dresses, very ugly women, and it's very, very, and it is sort of bless, so, most people just shrug their shoulders and whatever. But now, and what worries me and what makes me react negatively towards it, and I suppose I should, and that's a right response, is the fact that it has permeated every level of society, employment, family, schools, judicial system, all of that, where, talk about, we used to quip about the thought police. You are being policed by your thoughts. Even if your thoughts are completely rational, based in science, we're all taught to follow the science, that every, cell and chromosome in your body screams either male or female, science. But no, we're told that we must subject our rationale to the feelings of another person. No, we shouldn't cause them harm, physical, mental abuse, any of that. That would be anathema to the Christian way of life. But we must be true to the truth. And we mustn't let our thoughts be. You can lose your job for saying something, or even not agreeing. Or even not, I've heard of somebody who was disciplined in the workplace for not putting their preferred pronouns on their email tag. Well, it's company policy. And I won't say the name of the individual, but it was pretty clear that this person was male. Robert, say, or Stephen, it was a male name. He said, I don't need to put my preferred pronouns. And there he was pulled before his boss. And talk about, it makes me in a bit sad that, that this agenda is out there on so many levels, from the medical field to academia, to the workplace, to the judicial system. And people are buying into it. Now, there are some who are rejecting it and fighting against it and protesting. But on the whole, people are just going along to get along. I wish we as Christians had the same fire in our bellies to get our message out there. Because, I've no doubt if they're buying this stuff, they can accept what is true, And I'd been aware of the documentary and I hadn't watched it until this week. You sent it to me, Archbishop, the Matt Walsh documentary. There we are. That everyone must watch that. It's a little cheesy how it ends with him and the wife in the kitchen and the jam jar. But anyway, apart from that, it is fantastic. And our neighbors to the north, I'm not talking about the Upper Peninsula, but Canada is frightening. Absolutely frightening what's happening in that country. And even, just in general, you look at the trucker protest in Canada, the government came in and froze their bank accounts. You can lose your child for not acquiescing to a 4-year-old's idea of their gender. Come on, this is just absolute, and we really, this needs to stop. And I remember sitting in the cafeteria at work, and I think here in the United States that same-sex marriage had just been legalized, and somebody at the table said, "Oh, what next?" I said, "I'll tell you what next. What next will be um, the trans community, trans rights. It'll be everywhere, and I was right. And the same person came. They've now left employment. Came to me, and he said, "You were absolutely right. It's everywhere." I said, "Well, rather I wasn't right." And he goes, "Well, what's going to happen after this?" And I said, "Unfortunately, you're going to see the."
People attracted to minors.
Thank you. I was looking for a nice way to put that. Be normalized, and whereas when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, the marriage age was increasing. They were putting it up, but I can see now that there are certain sections that wanted to come down. So I was going to ask you to talk about that documentary, Archbishop, but I found it. I mean, I knew this, I was aware of it, but to watch it and hear it, and I mean, to see these people from the medical field and academia, I mean, had I just walked into a room and saw this on a television screen, I would laugh. I would think it was a comedy skit, a pastiche of how people talk in academia these days, or and one of the doctors, who was an abortion doctor and a pediatrician. I mean, how can you? It's like being a euthanasia doctor and a mortician. I mean,
Yeah.
or being a doctor and a mortician. I mean, you're either saving lives and providing care, or you're terminating them.
The delusional state of so the ones that stood out to me particularly were the so-called counselor at the beginning, the gender counselor, who began by saying that she being assigned female at birth, and later when Matt Walsh said, well, what is a woman? She said, great question. She said, I wouldn't know because I'm not one. And yet, quite clearly, she was a biological female. Then there was the vaginoplasty surgeon who was trans and extremely militant and aggressive even in her attitude. And who admitted that she had done vaginoplasty surgery on a 16-year-old, but had no problem conceptually of performing such surgeries on younger children. And then there was the supposed pediatrician and at the end who thought nothing of prescribing Lupon, which is a castration drug given to paedophiles in prison, prescribing the same for children as a puberty blocker.
And was very competitive when he brought up the fact when he called chemical castration.
I mean, she didn't want to use, refused to use that term, and almost tried, sort of suggesting that she thinks the interview should have ended.
Mm-hmm.
And she was very worrying, because the sincerity of her delusion was really quite something. She really could not understand or see how chemically castrating and sterilizing children, minors, was not in the best interests of children. She could not square that at all. And then, of course, was the so-called women's studies professor from Texas, who threw an epi fit when Matt Walsh mentioned the word truth. and said, if you use that word truth again, then this interview is over. And none of whom could answer the simple question, what is a woman? And this is the aspect that I find particularly baffling, is the number of so-called professionals, academics, experts, who all of a sudden can't answer the simple question, what is a woman?
Yeah, he goes to the Women's March in DC, and nobody could answer what is a woman. And but what's, I mean, that was kind of humorous. You're going to a Women's March and you don't know what a woman is. It's like, somebody from an elementary school in Tennessee showing up to anti-disestablishmentarianism meeting who hasn't a clue what it means. But when he was stopping people in New York in Times Square, no offense to anyone from Tennessee, I'm sure you're all anti-disestablishmentarianists, but people in Times Square were frightened to say, and women included, what a woman was. We're frightened. That to me, that was the most frightening thing, to see how people had been bowed and were cowering under this now new social accepted construct of it's quite all right to, people will tell you what a man is, evil, white, and patriarchy, but they will not tell you what a woman is. It's quite extraordinary where we've gotten to this level of confusion. And I thought on the whole that was extremely well done.
And the key thing about it is, and for those of you who perhaps haven't had the opportunity to watch it, it's available all this weekend on Twitter. If you go to Daily Wire on Twitter, you can watch the film for free. Initially, it was banned, but then Elon Musk, well, actually the supposed VP for censorship, resigned from Twitter, and Elon Musk made sure that the film was available, and Daily Wire decided then to make it available free to watch all this weekend. So if you haven't seen it already, or even if you have, it's worth seeing again. But just go to Twitter and search for Daily Wire or What is a Woman? And you can watch the whole thing. On YouTube, you can see various clips from the film. But on Twitter this weekend, you can see the whole thing. You can't watch the whole thing on YouTube because they banned it. And what's intriguing is that you will read and hear trans activists and allies and all the rest of it saying, the film is transphobic, the film is anti-trans, the film denies the existence of trans kids and trans people, and blah, 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 blah. That is complete hogwash. That is absolute hyperbole. There is nothing offensive in the film at all. There is nothing transphobic in the film at all. There is nothing homophobic in the film. And actually, Scott Nugent, that I referenced earlier, who is a trans man, so a woman who now presents as a man, gives a very honest and frank discussion of what is involved with trans surgery, and gives a very good insight into actually what's going on in terms of what's being proffered to children, and it's very clear that now obviously as a trans person, not 100% kosher, but nonetheless recognizes that this really should be an adult made decision. Not a decision made by adults for a child, but for a child to become an adult and then take on the responsibility for making such decisions about transitioning themselves. But Scott Nugent was very keen to ensure that such persons know the truth. And you can go to scottnugent.com actually, and find facts about the surgeries, find facts about the drugs, find facts about the way that children and parents are currently being manipulated and coerced by so-called benign experts to take on experimental drugs and irreversible, unnecessary surgery on healthy limbs. Now, of course, Jordan Peterson has gone, further, and actually was banned from Twitter for a while until Elon Musk bought Twitter. But Jordan Peterson was banned from Twitter before because of an article he wrote for one of the British newspapers, I think the Telegraph, where he called the surgeons and the paediatricians who advocate for transitioning children butchers. And if you've ever seen what vaginoplasty is and what is involved, you would agree, to be honest, with that assessment. And again, people underrate and underestimate the severity and the seriousness of what's involved in transitioning in terms of surgery and medication. The pediatrician on the film, What is a Woman, tried to suggest that puberty blockers she said it was like pressing pause on a CD. So puberty is the tune, and if you take a puberty blocker, you press pause on puberty, and then at any time you can stop taking puberty blockers, and that's like taking off the pause button, and the tune will just carry on with the next note as normal. That's absolute balderdash. That's absolute hogwash. The truth is that puberty blockers arrest development, and there is no going back, and there is certainly no normality going back, even if you come off puberty blockers later on. They do far more than just halt puberty. And of course, they are the castration medication given to sex offenders and paedophiles in jails. And Lupon is one of the drugs, but there are others that are used. And of course, as Scott Nugent pointed out, there are no long study research. There's no research available for the effects that these chemical castration drugs have on prepubescent and pubescent children. But what we do know is that the effects are irreversible. And likewise, the surgeries are completely irreversible. They're a hatchet job. Even the vaginoplasty trans surgeon in the documentary admits, I can't remember the phrase she used, but even she said, well, it's not 100% certain the outcome of any surgery. I think actually the odds are less than for heart surgery of successful vaginoplasty. And as Scott Nugent again points out in the film, what they do to other parts of the body to try and make and create a pretend genitals, and the actual utility of the organs they fashion. Again, it's a complete hodgepodge as to what the patient afterwards will be able to feel or not feel, or be able to do or not do. And it is very complicated surgery. I mean, there are people who have the operation who afterwards can't poo properly, can't pee properly, will never enjoy sex, will never. Some of them won't even be able to have sex. The drugs themselves as well negate emotions. They have an effect, physiological effect, not just on the genital organs, etc., and hormones, but they affect one's emotions and psychology as well. There's recently this week on Twitter, a young woman who was talked into taking the medical castration and having the hormone pills and all the rest of it, who said, she lost the capacity to love or to feel sexual attraction through them. And all this stuff is experimental. It's all experimental. There's somebody on Twitter today was trying to justify referring to one of the earliest known trans people, who was a guy in Britain who went to Germany in the 1920s and received medical and surgical attention to become the opposite sex to his biological sex, and seemed to have had a relatively successful experience. But people try all the time to make it all sound normal, to make it all sound, oh, this is not experimental, this has been going on for years, etc. And I'm sorry, I had to respond to that tweet on Twitter by pointing out that what was done then would not be done now, and what is done now could not be done then. But what is done now that happened after then was the eugenics experiments of the Nazis. And let's not forget that, again, Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood, she was a eugenicist, she was a racist. And as I've said many times before on this program, let's not forget the Democrats, who are now pushing all this LGBT ideology and this trans ideology, etc. Let's not forget that they are segregationists. They funded the Ku Klux Klan in the early days. They promoted the Jim Crow laws. They were last to give up on segregation in schools, on school buses. Joe Biden himself is on record, actual film footage of him referring to jungle bunnies and how he didn't want his kids to share a school bus with jungle bunnies. They come over now as the party of equality and diversity and so on and so forth. They are the segregationists. And if you think about the effect of the Obama presidency, when really all this equality and diversity stuff really came to the fore and all these progressive policies came to the fore, was during his time. And what's happened? They've created a segregationist society again, where now we have with Antifa and BLM and so on and so forth, trashing white people, gender critical theory, etc., revisionist history, so on and so forth. And what does that do? It doesn't bring society together, does it? Remember the riots, remember. And here in the UK, just last week, we had a theatre in London saying white patrons shouldn't come to a show, that it was a black home, this is for blacks only, and whites shouldn't come. Well, that's not unified. That's not social cohesion, is it? That's segregation. And it's unlike me to get political sometimes, I know, but now is that we've got to speak out and we've got to speak up. And the truth of the matter is, truth of the matter is that there are Republicans who are not kosher either on these matters, but which is why, as Catholics, we have to take it upon ourselves to make a stand. Something we've not talked about yet is Taylor Marshall's running for the US presidency. Now, Taylor Marshall is the first one himself to say he's unlikely to win. But the point is, he's making a stand. He's putting himself out there. And who knows? Maybe he might win. As Jaime, complains to God, how come I never win the lottery? And God says, Jaime, meet me halfway, buy a ticket already. Then, Taylor Marshall's just being Jaime's ticket. If you've got to be in it to win it. Now, he, as I say, Taylor Marshall he's unlikely to win. Nobody's suggesting that he will win, but just by standing, he puts a Catholic voice into the public debate and into the public discussion. Father Thomas, you're very quiet.
Well, one, I've had a whole bunch of noise in the background, so I've been muted because I've had lawn care people up front, and so there's been mowers and everything going, so I didn't want to interrupt any of that. I got nothing further.
You got to care for the lawn community.
Lawn what? Oh dear Lord.
Everyone has a community. Get a community.
Hermitage.
Right. Oh, you're anti-community.
Gladly.
Yeah.
Gladly anti-community.
You could have a white picket. Little fence around the lawn.
Well, it was the Dominican friar who at an airport was accused of wearing KKK robes, white habit.
I haven't had that yet. I've been called everything but that yet.
But it's not a white robe. I mean, he was one step ahead.
I know. But I'm really surprised though. Like when I've been up, I've had the hood up, walking, just praying. I haven't been called KKK yet. They called a Jesuit a lot.
Some words of wisdom from Anne. Is it when you move away from God's order, everything goes wrong? Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what we've seen with the increase of secularization in our society, the changing of social mores has evolved the erosion of the family and the basis of the very concept of society. What is a family but a community in miniature? What is a community but a family made large? And it's in the family where we learn how, we learn the checks and balances. We learn how to live in community or not live in community. But it's that's part of the benefits of a nuclear family, or indeed a large family, as used to be the case for many generations of human history. And the breakdown of the family is indicative of the erosion of our society.
John Paul II was always banging on about that, and in that instance, he was completely correct. He warned against the erosion of the family, and everything else that batters it. I mean, looking at the acceptance with so-called mainstream Protestant churches of contraception in the 1920s was the first chip in the wall. Because it is against the family of the very nature of what it deals with. But addressing Anne, was it, who made that comment
Yeah.
question there? Yeah, I mean, I remember as a boy in school in religion class, and somebody asking the priest, why does God cause earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and tsunamis and all that? And he replied, well, God doesn't cause it; He allows it, and He allows it because of the rupture we had from original sin, from the garden. That God does not create something that is imperfect, but we have made it imperfect by our rejection of God. And therefore, all of these things, like earthquakes and natural disasters, are allowed by God because we caused that rupture. Otherwise, perfect harmony would be in existence. And all of that, and to me, that made perfect sense. I'd never really thought of it, to be honest. I was just a boy, but it made perfect sense to me, that these things, that we're the cause of it, not God. Well, we're quick to blame, but yeah, the further we get away from God's order, which is perfect, all of this confusion and corruption, evil, uh, creeps in, and it, instead of the culture of life, which is God's harmony, it's a culture of death, which is confusion. And that's what we're dealing with. Just as the erosion of the family causes society, because it is a microcosm of a larger society, causes the corrosion of society. We see the outflowings of that. But yeah, on the macro scale, we see the disharmony caused by us. And yet we hold up this ridiculous notion, or current society holds up this ridiculous notion that we should replace God, that we should be the authors of creation. Now, I'm not going to open a can of worms and mention AI, which I just did. But you see where this is leading.
Yeah.
So we're the authors of confusion, disarray, and disorder. God is the author of harmony and order. The choice is quite simple. Who do we align ourselves with? The confusion that we create ourselves, and we've seen how nasty we have the potential of being. And we can also be very good too. The compassion shown by human beings throughout the many centuries has been nothing short of a miracle in itself. How these broken, disunified, disharmonious, wayward people that we are can tap into such goodness and mercy and love. However, the choice is quite simple. We either choose harmony and order, or disorder and confusion. It's not easy to make, but the choice is easy. I draw that distinction. We have an obligation to ourselves to align ourselves with God's harmony. And we do, because we have talked about stepping up and bringing Christianity and truth. It's sad that we have to bring truth back into the marketplace, but that we do have an obligation, because we are called to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. So we have to be true to God, true to ourselves, make that choice ourselves, but we also owe it to our neighbors and wider society. So if we're going to preach what happens in our own lives and what happens in our own families, or bemoan the disintegration of the family, then we also have to spread it out to the larger family, which is our communities, our parishes, our society, our countries, and all of civilization is kind of where that ends.
Yeah, and that brings us nicely full circle back to the Sacred Heart, and to devotion to the Sacred Heart, to the love and mercy of God in Jesus, to the consecration of families and homes to the Sacred Heart. That used to be a very popular Catholic devotion, And it was customary to enter a Catholic household and to see either a portrait of the Sacred Heart, or indeed a medallion, a silver, a large silver medallion of the Sacred Heart, fixed to the wall or near the door, near the holy water scoop. It was customary during this month of June for whole families, to consecrate themselves to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And that is something that, if you haven't already, or if you haven't done for a long time, something you could do this month, dear viewer. This is something you could do to make a point of renewing your love and commitment to Jesus through his most Sacred Heart, by making the act of oblation, the act of offering, the act of consecration. You can find various versions on the internet very easily, or in any old manual of devotion or missal. Make the act of consecration. Also make the act of reparation to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. The act, the reparation is to make recompense for the ignorance of Jesus's love and the rejection of Jesus's love, and the abuse of Jesus's love. So, as well as making an act of consecration to the Sacred Heart, also consider making the act of reparation to the Sacred Heart. If you're able, these are beautifully recited before the Blessed Sacrament. So if there is a church open with the Blessed Sacrament, then speak to Jesus your act of consecration and make your act of reparation before him. If not, then at home is fine. But get a medal of the Sacred Heart, or get an image of the Sacred Heart, put it up in your home, and I would suggest not, and it wasn't usual to place it in your domestic shrine. It wasn't usual to have it in your prayer corner, your icon corner, or your domestic altar, whatever, but rather the custom was to have it by the front door. And the point being that when somebody came into your home, they were greeted by the Sacred Heart. They could see this was a Catholic household. They could see this was a home consecrated to the heart of Jesus, and to all that entails and all that means and signifies. That a Christian household should be a home of welcome, of generosity, of hospitality, of charity. So if as a family you haven't yet, make the act of consecration together, and ask Jesus in his love to reside in your hearts and in your home, and place an image of his Sacred Heart by your front door, so that everyone who comes can see immediately that this is a place where charity dwells, where the divine charity dwells.
Yeah, and bringing it back to the family, for those families that are blessed with the capacity to have children, there used to be, I'm sure they're still available somewhere, images of the Sacred Heart where the father and mother's names were inscribed within a prayer at the very bottom of the image. And then there were sort of allotted slots for children. But going to these old bric-a-brac shops where you find these things still sort of hanging around in a box somewhere for sale, I've noticed that if you turn it over, there are more names on the back, because they'd run out of slots for names, and Catholics were having larger families, so they were put on the back. It is a wonderful thing, that I can't say anything more than His grace there, but the importance of the Christian home, of the domestic church, of what it symbolizes, residing in the heart of Jesus, in the Eucharistic heart of Jesus, which is our home. It's a wonderful, rich and powerful image, and a devotion that I would and have always encouraged people to follow. And it is linked nowadays with the revelations to Mary Alacoque, but it goes right back. I mean, Christ himself talks about his heart. His heart was pierced on the cross for us.
Prophesied by Isaiah.
Yeah. Yes. So it's ancient. It's central to the Christian life and what we're called, and everything that means. And it is a place of welcome. It's a place to reside, to have nourishment and rest. It's absolutely perfect. Of course, it's perfect.
Okay, so I think our suggestion then is for this month of June, which is traditionally dedicated to the Sacred Heart, make a point, as others make a point of putting rainbow stickers and flags up and around. Put up the Sacred Heart. Put up an image of the Sacred Heart in your home. Carry an image of the Sacred Heart on your person. If you're not already wearing the brown scapular, then get one, because then you will have both the Sacred and the Immaculate Hearts on your person. And try to live the humility of Jesus in God's love in your own lives. And that's the greatest counter to the current zeitgeist. Show humility where others show pride. Bishop Kelly, would you be kind enough to give us a blessing?
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Sit nomen Domini benedictum.
Ex hoc nunc adusque in saecula.
Auditorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
Qui feci caelum et terra.
Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sanctus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And so 2 weeks' time will be our next episode. God bless you, and thank you all for watching this one. Please do like and share it and enable others to see it. And we look forward to seeing you all ourselves in a fortnight's time. Meanwhile, of course, the Angelus and the Mass and everything else is still broadcast daily on the Old Roman TV channel. Do check our Twitter channel. The Old Roman is on Twitter. Lots of interesting things there. It's slightly more active than the website, but you can access it from the website. So if you go to theoldroman.com, if you scroll to the bottom of the page, you will see the Twitter feed, and you can see what the Old Roman is tweeting on Twitter. You can also find there access to the Facebook page, so to our YouTube channel, and of course otherwise you will find devotionals and headlines of Catholic interest. So theoldroman.com, if you haven't been already, please do visit. Otherwise, we're very grateful to those of you who generously sponsor through our Patreon channel. Please, if you don't already, please consider doing so. Patreon.com/Old Roman TV. And the more we receive, the more we can give in terms of content and programming. So it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from them.
Oh, where's my hand gone? Oh, over here. Damn.
Take care. God bless.
Bye-bye.